Good afternoon. There's so many of you. So, I'm Temi, and I must admit, I am about 80% excited, 20% a little bit nervous, but hopefully we can have a great presentation. And I really hope that you guys end up learning a lot of stuff. Feel free to approach me afterwards. Really happy to answer any questions that anybody might have individually. But first of all, let me get into it and tell you a bit more about who I am. So name is Temi, as I said. I am currently head of design at Blinkist. And if you don't know what Blinkist is, we are a service that takes the best-selling non-fiction books and distills it into key insights that you can read or listen to in only 15 minutes. So you get all of that knowledge from the fantastic world of non-fiction books in a very accessible format. I joined back in 2015. Back then, there was no designer. So I joined as the first one. Before then, it was Nicholas Jansen, one of the co-founders, who was doing all the design work. So when I jumped on board, I was super excited to bring a higher level of design to Blinkist and to really transform how we think about design and how we approach design in the organization. Today, we are 100 people at Blinkist. We're based in Berlin. And the design team itself is a team of 8, including myself. So 7 product designers and 1 UX researcher, growing like crazy right now. What's also growing is our user base. Currently have 6 million users all around the world, and that number is just increasing. So I would like to take us back to 2015. 2015 being the year that I joined Blinkist. And one of the first projects that I worked on there was something that we called Social. Social for Blinkist was a set of features that aimed to bring a way to connect with your friends who might be on the platform already. So you would be able to see what they were reading, you would be able to see the highlights that they were making, get a deeper understanding into what resonated with them, and likewise, your friend could do the same. And Social was quite a huge project for us. So as you can see, there was 1 designer, that was me. There were 3 developers, 1 copywriter, plus a bunch of people working on marketing. This was a 6-month project. And you might be looking at this and thinking, this is actually kind of a small team, but keep in mind that in 2015, we were about 14 or 15 people. So this amount of people working on a project for 6 months was actually quite a lot back in that time. And we thought that this work was, of course, going to pay off for us. One thing that we didn't actually recognize was this was a big, unvalidated bet. So all of the assumptions that we made were very much just assumptions that we never checked. So the idea that people would want to connect with their friends on their profile, connect with their friends on the platform, rather. Did we know that for sure? Nope. The idea that when people were reading and something resonated with them so much that they would make a highlight in text, did they want to share that with their friends or anybody else on the platform? We had no clue. And that was kind of a mistake, because what we found out after we shipped, readers definitely didn't want this. And in fact, this feature had a 1% adoption rate. And I like to think about the other way, as in 99% of people didn't give a crap about this. But we'd spent all this time on it, and we had shipped it. And we never really validated against whether users actually wanted that. So why the hell did we work on this in the first place? We never really fundamentally asked that question. We worked on something, we shipped it out there, and if we were really honest with ourselves, as we were later on, the main driver for this project was pure business goal. We weren't really thinking about what our customers wanted. We weren't really listening to our customers. And back in 2015, Blinkist itself was a company that was about 3 years old. And honestly, we didn't know that much about our customers at that point in time. So we made a lot of mistakes, like quite a lot. But I believe we learned from them. And 1 year later, 2016, we shipped something else that ended up being a big hit for us. and it was called Autoplay for Audio. What this feature was a one-tap autoplay list that the user could just trigger this list and listen to a stream of their books. The books would pull from the library, and they could have this uninterrupted way to enjoy audio on the go. So previously, the user could only listen to one book at a time, and in this way, they didn't have to go back to library, select another book, and continue listening. So it was very low friction rather, and it just made the experience much more easy for them. In hard numbers, as I say, it was a pretty big hit for us. 46% increase average duration of audio sessions. People were listening to more audio with this feature. So that was an amazing sign for us. In addition to that, we saw that people were actually coming back again and again, month over month, to consume more audio. So we had, in this sense, shipped something that our users were actually enjoying, that people were finding value with. And when we took a step back to think about what was different here compared to social, I think a lot of it had to do with intuition. And I'd like to take a step back and firstly talk a bit more about what intuition is, and specifically what intuition is in design. Let's start with the definition. Intuition, the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning. I'll let that ponder whilst I take a sip of water. I was really worried that would be like some kind of accidental ASMR, but it wasn't. It was really great. So intuition is probably something that's led us to say something like this: that's bad design. And it's a kind of snap judgment that we have when we're first using a product. Could be anything really. Could be an app, of course. Could be a website. I mean, even last week I was in a lift or elevator, depending on where you're from, and just the buttons were just organized so weirdly. And for me, it was like, okay, that's bad design, snap judgment. And maybe we've said something like, that experience is a bit odd, or that's hard to use. Maybe we've even said something on the other hand, such as, that's great design, or that's easy to use. These things, like these snap judgments, I believe we come to them because we have this thing called design intuition. And design intuition is something that is made up of a few different things. It's made up of our formal training, the time that we spend at university learning about design, so university or any other schooling. It's made up of our time on the job. So the real hands-on experience that we have solving issues or solving real problems. Our successes, our failures, all of the things that experience teaches us. It's formed of our design eye, and of course it's formed of using other products, seeing how other product makers, how other designers are solving for specific issues. And design intuition is great because it really helps be the North Star when we're working on something new, so that we're not having to relearn all of these things all over again when we start a new project, but we have kind of a base foundation. So if design intuition is so great, why is intuition undervalued? And I personally think it's because we are at this stage in time where we have so much more data that in comparison, intuition starts to look like simply guessing. And not only just guessing, but guessing that is completely baseless and unsubstantiated. So we have this hard data, and that gives us something concrete. So in comparison, having a gut feeling is sort of looked down upon. However, I think that intuition and data actually work together quite well. And it all really depends on how you have that gut feeling, that hunch, how you take that and begin to validate it and begin to pair it with data to understand more about your intuition and to understand more about the problem that you're trying to solve and the problems you believe exist in your experiences. So there are a number of things that I believe that we can do to make our intuition stronger, to actually begin to trust that intuition more. And there are 3 things that I will introduce. The first one being to investigate the hunch that you have. So the hunch being kind of another word for intuition, the guess that you make based on intuition. And I would like to talk about the hunch that I had for autoplay. So it was something that that I felt as a user of our own product, and I know I wasn't the only one who was alone with this kind of feeling. So to explain this hunch a bit more, I will paint a little picture. One day I was on my way to the grocery store, and at this point in time, I didn't live too far away from it. Before I left the house, I put on Blinkist, and the purpose of that was I wanted something to entertain me as I was doing this really regular, mundane task. So I put it on, I jump on the bike, cycle to the supermarket 3 minutes, and it's great because Blinkist is there during this commute, and I feel like I have something that is accompanying me, basically. I get to the supermarket, pick up my basket, and I'm walking up and down the aisles, trying to find the things that I need for home. And as I'm in the midst of this primary task, I'm finding that actually the book that I selected is coming to an end. And this is kind of an issue because this task that I'm performing now, grocery shopping, is not finished yet. So then I figure, okay, I kind of have this dilemma. I have this basket of groceries in this hand, and all I really want to do is listen to another book so that I am not really, really bored as I, go through and find groceries. So what I could do is put that basket of groceries down, take off the backpack, find my phone in the backpack, unlock the phone, tap Blinkist, go to my library, look at the books that I have, try and figure out the kind of mood that I'm in. What am I desiring to read? What's my context? What interests me in this moment? Make that choice, play the book, lock the phone, put the book back in my bag, put my backpack back on, pick up my basket of groceries, and continue shopping. So it seems even a little bit exaggerated, but in actuality, when you are performing another task and listening to audio, that is really the steps that are involved in this. And for me, I just kind of, stood there and thought, this is a bit too much. This is annoying, and I wonder if Blinkist users are also finding this annoying too. So as I say, that's my hunch, or that was the hunch that I had. But I know I wasn't the only one with that hunch because other people in the organization had mentioned similar things. Mentioned, going from home to grab a coffee on the way to work, and they're listening to Blinkist or, listening to a book rather, and the book is finishing, but they're still doing this thing. And keep in mind that, of course, this paradigm of listening to something and then something else playing when it finishes is very common to us. We have it with music and so on. We have it with, let's say, podcasts if we're listening to one after another. It's not an unfamiliar paradigm. So we're wondering for ourselves as product makers, why do we not have a similar experience in the app? And do our customers need or expect to have this experience too? So at this stage, this is where investigating it comes in. And I like to visualize it in this kind of flow where we have this hunch and we investigate that. And then there are following steps that will happen as well to make sure that we take that hunch and put it through a more rigorous process to actually find out, is this a problem that exists? And is this a problem that's worth working on? There are a couple of ways that you can start to investigate your hunch. Firstly, qualitative feedback. Things like speaking to your customer support team, if you have one, seeing if they begin to see a pattern in terms of recurring feature requests or recurring issues that people are mentioning again and again. There are things like usability testing. So you could either look back on usability testing that exists already. So it could be usability testing, could be user interviews. See if there's anything there that exists in pre-existing data. You could, of course, run fresh usability testing or user interviews, evaluate the current status quo of your service, your app, your website, etc., and see if people have this kind of pain point. really begin to understand more about your users, start listening more. Another thing that you can do, of course, is leverage the quantitative data that exists already. And I think this is great if you want those concrete numbers, that hard data, to figure out if a signal there exists that tells you, hey, maybe my hunch is correct. And the way that I would just suggest applying something like this is, let's say you have a particular flow or an experience. Within that flow, you can see where people are dropping off. If your hunch is that a specific part of this experience is not performing as it should be, that data might tell you, hey, there's a drop-off here. That's a signal that something is wrong. So you can begin to look at that, begin to investigate it. And I think sometimes as designers or as product people, there can be this weird struggle or tension between looking at that hard data and thinking about the way that we design. We try and use empathy, and it can feel like there's that tension that hard data is at odds with creating a better customer experience. But a great quote that I heard was, data is human behavior aggregated. I say I heard it, I should just give credit to one of the co-founders at Blinkist, who's Nicholas, because I'm sure he would watch this back and be like, I said that. But what this means is people are on your system, people are on your apps, on your websites, and data is the patterns that these people are forming. It's not just these little numbers or these charts or whatever. It's humans doing something enough to make a pattern, and you use that pattern to actually then listen to what they're doing and to improve your experience. So I wanted to share this. I also wanted to share an example of some of the evidence that we collected when we were working on autoplay. So this guy actually presents a similar issue to the hunch that I had, but phrased in a very different way, or he experienced it in a different way, rather. I listen while running. Once the book finishes, I'm forced to fumble around with my phone to get the next book. Meanwhile, I'm tripping over roots and running off the trail. So this guy's gonna sustain a neck injury if we don't try and solve this issue. And this is just one item of evidence that we collected. Other people were having similar issues in a different way. For example, many of our customers are in the US, and one way that they were consuming Blinkist, and still consume it today, in fact, is to listen in the car during their commutes. And we had people who were, enjoying a book during their commutes. And the issue is, the book is 15 minutes. Commute is often a little bit longer than that. And they were writing in and saying, there's a real issue when I have Blinkist on in the car, because all of a sudden the book finishes. And it's super dangerous for me to then find my phone and select another book. So we were looking at this evidence and actually thinking about, okay, how can we take that and apply it? And one of the things that we did from after that point, is to make it really clear, start making some hypotheses. So to reframe the hunch that we had, so the previous hunch being, I'm grocery shopping, the book finishes, but I haven't finished shopping, it's really annoying. Reframing things in a design hypothesis takes that hunch, and it makes the problem much more objective, it makes it more user-centric, and it's something that ends up being shareable. And the way that we rephrased it here was, readers might struggle to choose what to read next when on the go, because they can only play one book at a time and must find a new title after each one ends. So this was the start of our hypothesis for this specific problem. And our design hypothesis is actually a little bit longer than this. So you start with your problem, and you define who that problem is an issue for. So it could be a reader, could be a shopper, could be a gamer, whatever. This person might have a specific problem because a proposed explanation. So this is your hunch rephrased. Then you move on to your evidence. So we believe this because evidence found. And that's the evidence that you've just collected that backs up that this problem might actually exist. So from your qualitative feedback, from your quantitative data, you use it here to support the belief that this issue exists. And for anybody who might have seen a design hypothesis before, something that you might see is Some do not contain this evidence section, and that's completely fine. It's up to you how you want to do this. For us, and for me specifically, I think having this evidence section here is important because it helps make a better case for actually working on this problem. And it also means that you're not following a hunch that maybe doesn't actually exist. So if I, for example, just had that issue whilst grocery shopping, but there were no other signals to back up that this issue was really a thing, I would be like, okay, cool, that's just me. I'm just, the person who doesn't get the shopping done within 15 minutes and everybody else is fine. But the evidence collected there actually makes it much more solid that, hey, something exists, and it puts a bigger level of focus and importance on it. It also can help to prioritize what you're going to be working on. Once you have your evidence, you move on to solution and outcome. So you've laid out your problem, you've added your evidence, then you begin to think in a pretty top-level way, what might the solution be for this specific problem? So for us, it could be something like, therefore, giving users a way to listen to a stream of books might reduce choice fatigue. This is not supposed to be a very, very, super in-depth way that you're going to solve it, but rather it should be a more top-level thing. And you'll find out a little afterwards why it should stay top-level. But you can already begin here writing and documenting what you believe a solution to this should be. After this, you move on to your metrics. And your metrics is a way to define what success looks like if you're going to solve this specific problem right. So for us, it's, number of audio sessions increased. For someone else, it could be purchase conversion, could be bounce rates. You could also look at things like less customer support tickets, which is also a metric that we use, but it should be something measurable. It doesn't always need to be extremely hard data. It could be still something that gives you an indication that you're actually on the right mark. Once you have all of this great documentation formed, you can move on to validating or invalidating your solutions. And this is something to keep in mind as well. Your proposed solution is a hunch too. The way that you believe the problem should be solved, that again is simply your best guess. That again is your intuition coming into play. Your intuition, as mentioned, formed of things like your design training, your experience on the job, your experience solving similar problems. That intuition is coming back into play here. It tells you about problems that exist, and it also tells you about how to solve problems. But knowing that it is a hunch, we still need to do some investigative work. And a hypothesis is great because you begin to feel about potential solutions and the problem in a way that allows you to experiment more broadly. You don't think of, okay, there's a problem and there can only be one solution. When you have a hypothesis, you can almost apply that kind of like mad scientist way of solving things into how you experiment with solving that problem. So something that you can do early on is simply test those prototypes. Could be any kind of fidelity depending on the kind of insights that you want to derive. So it could be, of course, paper prototypes, making sketches, sharing it with your fellow designers or PMs or other people on your team, of course, also real users. You could then later on move to something that might be higher fidelity, maybe something created in Framer, maybe pairing alongside with a developer to produce something in code, and ultimately then testing something early enough and having something that you can test throughout the design process. And hypothesis-driven design is really awesome because as you're testing these prototypes, you can also have these learnings, go back to your hypothesis and start tweaking your solution, make more hypotheses that change that solution and outcome, and like really, really live that experimentation phase. This is really a time to test your solutions, and it's really a time to break them as well. Then, of course, there's usability testing. So you can have this in a more structured way, speak to real users. see where they have problems with your proposed solution, see where maybe they are giving suggestions that you didn't even think about. So usability testing is awesome for this. Likewise, user interviews, even something like co-creation, where maybe you have an initial idea of how a solution should be solved, but you bring in users and help them design the solution alongside you, so that they're actually helping to solve the problems that they face as well. Another thing that you can do is move on to A/B testing. And A/B testing is an awesome way because you have your hypothesis defined, and you can A/B test something and check that against your defined metric. And it's something that you can use for a smaller solution or a smaller problem. Maybe you take that whole solution and you simply A/B test it. Something that is kind of crazy to know in hindsight was when we released social, we didn't A/B test anything. We just shipped it 100%, something that was completely unvalidated, and just delivered it all. In hindsight, something that would have been great for us to do is we had this huge feature. We could have simply sliced that down into some specific components, tested that, see if that worked, see if that moved the needle. If it didn't, we could have iterated on that. If it did, great, we could have gone on and tested the next thing before we shipped it all out together. And as I say, A/B testing really gives you a more objective metric to look at. So is it actually performing against the success metric that you have specifically defined in your hypothesis? And here's where it appears on this kind of process. And I believe that when you are experimenting, you do go quite often between experimentation and hypothesis and back again. And the idea being that maybe you learn something in that experiment phase that tells you something more about how to formulate a hypothesis in a more better way. You can also go back, create new hypotheses based on the problem, different ways to solve it, and run them all through that experimentation phase. And we're drawing to the end of this talk. It's been fast but sweet. So why even take intuition seriously in the first place? I think there are a number of really solid reasons to do this, but I picked 5 to share with you. Firstly, empathy. It's a huge thing that we're about as designers, but sometimes I think it can get really lost if we're thinking in a very, very data-driven way. As I mentioned, data is our friend as well, and there's a lot that we can learn from it, and there's a lot that we can leverage from it. But when we're actually thinking this approach, when we give that respect to our intuition, we can better put ourselves in the position of our own users. If you have a product that you're able to use yourself as a consumer, that's great. Use it. I like the term eat your own dog food. Really live the product. Put yourself not just as a designer who's solving this, who is one step removed from what your users are doing, but actually feel the frustrations that they go through and start thinking about, okay, where might issues exist with this? Start thinking about opportunities that might be missed. You know, what is here, what isn't here that could be here? Form those hunches, run it through that process, investigate, experiment, build, and so on. Secondly, strengthen your intuition with data, deeper understanding of your users. As I mentioned earlier on, social for us was a huge bomb, and I believe one of the big reasons with that was because 3 years into the company, we just didn't know that much about users. And over time, we got better at listening. We got better at using our own product. And we found that as we kept doing that, and as we kept using our intuition, it's something that does get stronger over time. You learn more about your users. You are able to then make better, accurate guesses about what they might need. You're then able to make better guesses about the pain points that they might be having in your system. And doing that over time, you begin to build this solid knowledge base. And of course, you would then back that up with data. You would then think about, how can I investigate this? But all the whilst that you're doing this, you're becoming much stronger in your understanding about who you're designing for, about who you're building for. Third, fail early, learn quickly. You have that hunch. Maybe it's something that it's just experienced by you. If it is, investigate it. And if you find out that there are no signals that exist, great. You learn that really quickly and you move on. That can still tell you something about what is missing, what is needed. If you find that maybe you have this hunch or this instinct, explore that. If it's not completely on the money, you might find that there's something there, but maybe not as you expected it to be. There's still learnings to be had there. And of course, there's still learnings to be had if you're actually completely on the money and you figure something out. However, in this kind of methodology, when you are investigating that hunch first, seeing what evidence exists, then you're moving on and you're testing your solutions. And you're doing that throughout your entire design process. You start to understand better who specifically am I designing for. You start to understand better what is working about this for that user set. And when you figure out, okay, I have made a solution that doesn't quite work, you figure that out pretty damn early, not when it's shipped. And you still have time to adjust and ship things and actually get closer to releasing something that people are going to feel satisfied with. Fourth, documentation is like really, really wonderful. What I love about hypotheses in general is it is something for people to refer back to. It's something that lays clear what the problem is. It's something that lays clear what your ideas are for how that should be solved. It doesn't just live in your head. It's something that can go out to other people. It's great in terms of getting PMs, if they're not working alongside this hypothesis with you. It's great for getting them on board. It's great for getting developers on board. And something that we found as well is when you have something like this, that collective, I would call it, that collective intuition across your organization actually gets better. You don't always need to be the one who is having the hunch and investigating it. If other people are doing that in your organization as well, and they're developing hypotheses for this, maybe you're working on a problem that they have tried to tackle before, and you can see this hypothesis, see how they framed the problem, see how they've solved it, see whether it moved the mark or not. You're able to get these learnings and actually use that as a launch point for the kind of things that you're trying to solve for too. And it's great to refer back to during the design process as well to keep you on track so that the scope of what you're trying to do doesn't change, so that you're not trying to solve more problems than need be during that design phase. And lastly, solve problems that real people care about. I think this goes for all of us, whether you're in a B2C, whether you're in a B2B, whether you're working on whatever product. When you're making something specifically for human beings, you really do want to solve for them specifically. And this kind of way, you are making sure that you do that in all stages of the process. So you're using that empathy, that intuition, to really think about the human need, to really think about the human problem. And when you find that, okay, this is something that exists, because you've done that upfront work and you've investigated it, you, I believe, feel more confident that you are solving the right issues. You're not solving something that is frivolous or meaningless. You're solving something that should hopefully make a change to the person using that. Likewise, as you're going through the process and you're speaking to people, you're running user interviews, you're doing usability testing, you're finding other ways to reach out to your users, you're creating solutions that when you check the data, these numbers are actually improving in a meaningful way. You know that you're doing something that is going to mean something for people. And ultimately, I feel like as designers, that is what we're here for. That is the job that we're trying to do. We're trying to make a change. No matter the kind of problem that we're trying to solve, this is what we're trying to do. And that's data-driven intuition. Thank you. I think we got some time for questions.
Yes, a few of them.
Hi, thanks very much. How did you handle feature creep? When you were talking about the grocery shopping, you talked about the mood you were in, which made me immediately think of machine learning and predictive picking of the title. And I think later on you inferred that that was a bad idea. Do you want to comment?
Yeah, of course. How do we handle feature creep? That's a good question. I think for us, we're pretty good as a company in avoiding that happens. And I think this goes back to some of the past mistakes that we've made before, where for something like social, we could have just released one type of feature to validate, even at that stage, whether it was something that was going to make sense for our product or not. But instead, we shipped this whole suite of features, and was much harder to go back and to assess, like, should any part of this remain. And if you look at the app today, that whole social thing is like scrubbed clean, by the way, like it never happened in the first place. And I think for later products, especially something like autoplay and other things that we've done before, we really believe in this MVP method where we start there. We think about what is the most simple or efficient solution for that particular problem, and we try to solve for that specifically. I think with feature creep, a lot of it is also just like checks and balances, and you have to ask yourself whether you're specifically addressing that problem or whether you're just kind of like shoehorning more stuff in because it's cool or whatever. I hope that answers it.
Thanks for the great talk. I have a question, which is, what would you have done if the social feature had worked?
That's a good question. I think if the social feature had worked, then even though we completely did everything wrong to start with, then we would have said to ourselves, okay, clearly people felt that this belonged in a product, and clearly people felt that there was a need for this. I don't think there's any product where everything that's in there is 100% validated and done 100% the right way. Sometimes you put stuff in there and it's like, oh, weird, that works. And if it was a, oh, weird, that works kind of situation, then cool. I think in the end, we're trying to have a product that our customers are fundamentally going to enjoy and want to use and so on. And if they did end up like enjoying the social feature, it would have been fine. Furthermore, we spent a long time on it. So if that had been the case, then it would have been great.
Okay, thank you for a very insightful presentation in the first place. I have a quick question, because you work on a product and you have your team, you work in-house, I suppose.
Yeah.
What about agencies? Because that intuition or hunch is, I think it's a good way to implement it, but how to sell it? Because client would ask, and intuition is not a good argument, I think.
Good question. It's funny because I think back to my own time at agency, and so much of it was actually unsubstantiated guessing, like what is the best way to try and solve this, and a lot of it would just be gut feeling. I think in that sense, it was intuition, but not used in the right way, because there was nothing that was really supporting the kind of guesses that we were making. So although we had things like the training and also working on different products, so in a sense that helped, I mean, let's just call it expertise, I suppose, but it wasn't really backed by anything. I think in an ideal case, when you're using intuition, I think especially when you're solving for a product or solving for like specific customer, like human needs, you will have a way to validate this. And I guess ultimately in an agency, you don't have sometimes that rich data set or pre-existing knowledge of customers. So I would suggest to you, if you're an agency or anybody else in an agency, find out what your client knows already, find out if they've done any research, find out how you can leverage what they know. And if you have intuition, begin to use that kind of data. If you can also sell, like being able to speak to their customers, sell research, ultimately, I think that's also a great way, because, as I say, the solution that you're going to create as a designer and agency, that is your intuition. But if you can actually get in front of their users or get in front of people in their target group, at least that is one step where you're able to validate that intuition that you have, to talk to their users to see if your solution might be on the money. And as I say, coming back to my own experience at agency, we didn't have that. I think it was also very much a different time where there was less emphasis on using research in in design agency, I think, whereas I believe, having spoken to more people working as designers or product people in agencies, the tide has kind of turned a bit, and there is more respect and more appreciation for research and also just using data in the first place. So I hope that answers it. It's harder, but I don't think it's impossible.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we can start the lunch break. Thank you, Temi.
Thank you.